Welcome to this edition of Almost Professional. Let's take a look at some Photoshop work and make it even better. Today we're looking at barely stopping traffic. Now, this polar bear in the middle of New York City is pretty cool, I do have to say. Probably not something you see every day. So what we need to do first is go ahead and just kind of break down the layers. We see our polar bear here, we see some drop shadow there, and we see New York City. Now, the original bear actually had a little bit of a warm pattern. It was shot in some nice diffused lighting, which is good. That allows us to shape and to direct a lot of the light that we can do now in Photoshop. So it's a good start to the piece. So we've dampened the color, we've cooled it down a little bit to match because there's cool lighting in the street, and we needed to do that to the photograph. So that's already been done in a destructive layer. Now, ideally, I like to do it with adjustment layers so I can have the ability to edit and do that later, but it wasn't done that way. But we did a pretty good job with masking out the bear. Now, obviously, with artificial intelligence, selecting a subject is a lot easier than it used to be, but it's getting pretty simple. So now for the hard part, the stuff that the computer isn't ready to handle, at least yet. So I'm going to go and turn on our mask, and we see the polar bear. And actually, it's a pretty good mask. If I zoom in here, the mask actually looks pretty good. It's got pretty good touch-up of the fur. Maybe a little bit of grass there, like we're missing some of his paw because it's in the grass. So that's hard to, if you look at the original photograph, if his paw is missing, which it is, that doesn't help because now we're actually going to miss part of his paw. So we could recreate his paw. That's challenging, but that's a problem we're having right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just enable that again. And my shadow helps to give him some direction. I think the biggest thing we need here is that he just doesn't appear to fit color-wise in the scene. There's a lot of colors. If you go to New York City, there are lots of colors floating around. We have colors all from the different colors, the green, sodium vapor lights in the building, the street lights will have a different color. There's different color warm lights from everywhere bouncing around. It's a very foggy day, so that's kind of playing with some of the light quality as well. Now, we do see a lot of the light is behind him, at least what we see in the scene. So I think casting the shadow to behind or to the front of us, behind the bear, is probably a good thing because that's where we need it. Now, what I'll try to do is I'll try to study the scene for shadows in the area, and there really aren't a lot of shadows. You see a little bit of light from this person here, and a little bit of shadow, more like a reflection almost in the water. So, okay. Little bit of shadow, kind of reflection on the street pole. So I guess it's somewhat at this angle. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is take our shadow, which I think is a little bit off. Ours is to the right a little bit, maybe 45 degrees from the camera. And it's probably almost straight on to the bear. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the shadow layer off. And I'm going to do it, instead of a blank layer, I'm going to go ahead and do it a different way. And I'm also going to put the shadow below the bear. So even if nothing else, I'd put the shadow below the bear. That will help so it doesn't cover his feet. Because the shadow isn't going to be on top of his feet when he's already in the shade. So I'm going to create an adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to, well, let's do levels. That's my simple, easy one. And I'm going to go ahead and darken this a bit. And obviously the whole city is getting dark right now. I'll change that in a second. Make it somewhere like this. I can adjust it later, so don't worry about that. I'm going to go, once I have my selection, go clicking my mask. I can go to my mask properties, invert it, so now it's black. Once it's black, I can now paint white to add where I want the shadow. So I'm going to take my brush tool, the letter B for the keyboard if you want to like shortcuts. And I'm going to go ahead and change my brush size to make it a little bit larger. 0% hardness is fine. Turn up my opacity all the way at this point because I can adjust it later. Come in with my brush, and that might be a little bit larger brush. So I'm going to use the bracket keys to turn it off. Turn off the original shadow. Have my layer, and I'm going to go ahead and paint white. I can toggle back and forth if I have the right thing selected. Right now, I guess I don't. I can toggle back and forth. White on my mask, and I'm going to start to paint where that shadow is. And it's kind of just covering up those textures. Not perfectly, but it's putting them in the scene. Now he's got a little bit of a bear-like shape. I can take his head where the head would be. As he's casted a little bit of his head shape in here. And his big body and his big, impressive frame. Something like that. Okay, looks pretty good. Probably a little bit of gap between his feet. So I'm going to paint white, black because I'm adding to this one. I'm going to paint black to kind of get rid of the gap in there. And let's see where that shapes down. Okay, we're starting to put some more direction. Before it was kind of this random blob. And we want to have a little more direction to kind of mimic. We're trying to simulate what the bear shadow would actually look like in real life. And I think we can improve on that. So I go to my adjustment layer. I'm going to go ahead and darken it off a little bit more. I can go extreme dark, like, ooh, that's a little bit much. I don't want to go necessarily that dark. Maybe 100, 110 or so. And that looks better. It's adding a little different direction to match the light that's there and adding more for his head, which I think is a good thing. Now, sometimes I'll actually do a couple different things. I'll add a hard layer and a soft layer. Most shadows in real life will have a harder layer that's more direct dark shadow near the body, and as it goes away and the light's bouncing around, it will actually have less shadow. It'll be a little less refined shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and just take it here with my brush, and to do that, I'm going to go ahead and paint black to remove maybe the edges of some of this shadow. But I'm going to do it with a zero or with a minimum opacity, maybe 30-40% opacity. So it's only partially going to remove. Something like that, just to kind of extra soften the edges of the shadow. Keep it dark by the feet. Something like that. And I think that helps. Shadow's a little bit better. And I think, what else can we do? We've added a shadow, we've cut out the bear. How much else are you expecting of me? Well, we can do more. So we need to add colors to the bear. Now to do that, there's a couple different ways. I could come up and I could do like a different type of select fill or gradient fill or a color overlay in the effects. The problem is that's usually one color or kind of a gradient of colors. Because there's so many different light sources bouncing around in the city, I'm actually just going to do it a manual old school way, and that's great. I'm going to go ahead and top of my bear layer, create a new layer, put it above Mr. Polar Bear. And on this layer, I'm going to just call it green color. And I'm going to go ahead and sample some of the green from the stoplight. To do that, I go to my options, or to do that, I go to my tool panel, click the little eyedropper tool. Once the eyedropper tool is selected, I'm going to go ahead and just select anywhere on my frame. I'm going to select some of that greenish color from the stoplight. This is not a stoplight, that's a street light that's green too. That's interesting. Green street lights. What's the world coming to? And now I'm going to take that layer. Now I'm going to take a brush, go back to my brush, and I'm going to put it with an opacity of like 40%. I don't want it to be completely solid all the way through. I'm going to use a fairly large brush. I'm going to start to paint layers. Now what I want to do, so I don't have to mask around the bear all again after I do my layer, I'm going to go ahead and create a clipping mask on here. Right click, clipping mask. Once I've got a clipping mask, now I can paint, and I can only paint on the bear. I can't paint outside the lines. Wouldn't that have been great in kindergarten if you could just say, oh, take this picture and it's impossible to paint outside the lines. It would have been so much better in 5K. But we didn't have that option. So I'm going to have the clipping mask, and I'm going to start to paint just colors of green on my bear. Some that's bouncing off the floor, maybe a little bit on his head. Now it's at a partial opacity, 40%, so it's not completely the same color at this point. That looks pretty good. And it's probably a little bit of light coming from the stoplight. And I could be imaginative. I have some artistic license because I don't know where all the light's bouncing around. That looks pretty good. There's a lot of green light in here. That looks okay. Now I'm going to come up here and create a new layer. Make it a clipping mask. This one I'm going to call cyan color. And I'm going to sample again from the colors of the windows. A different color green. Or actually more of the cyan color here. It's a different color. More of a blue-green color. Okay. And once I've got the sample, go back to my brush, and there's a lot of back and forth. Maybe for some of you it gets kind of laborious. I'm going to turn back my opacity even a little bit less, a little more faint, 24% opacity, and just start to paint some of the color on my bear. Before it looks like this bear has gone through a color run, we'll just kind of give him a little patchiness. Something like that. That's better. Just adding, trying to reflect what could be there. That looks pretty good. I could change my opacities or bring it down. Maybe the green color a little bit intense. Bring back some of that green color so it's not quite as vibrant on him. And let's check another color, maybe a little more of this blue color. There's probably some blue color on there, so I'm going to do a blue color. And again, you can be very creative in terms it doesn't have to be perfect. You have artistic license by all means, and so don't feel you have to be restricted to. This is exactly the way that the guy did it on the YouTube video. Well, but the guy is on Better Picks, and you can promote that to other people, which would be great. So I have blue color here. I'm going to go and just dab in a little bit of blue color shape there. We could also even use like a different brush stroke. At this point, I think a nice round brush is fine to add some different colors there. And something like that, maybe a little bit by the feet. We haven't done much by the feet. It'll help cool them down a little bit. Something like that. Now I'm going to turn the opacity down just to control the amount. But I think that's starting to, the blue layer might really help to kind of tighten because it was kind of a cool, and he already did some cooling layer. I'm going to go ahead and just ever so faintly, like turn down the opacity to the maybe 5%, just enough to kind of just start to paint color onto the bear. That's helping. Now, the last step I'm going to do is going to darken the bear a little bit because the bear has some white fur. We've darkened it down already. We've cooled it down. We've added some color. Go to my bear layer. I'm going to create an adjustment layer. I'm going to go to curves. I'm going to go ahead and darken it a little bit. Now, I'm going to go a lot. Ooh, that looks nasty. I don't want to do it like that. I'm going to do a little bit. Some layer, though, it will look very bad. And I'm going to just patch it down. Something like, we'll go extreme for now just so I can see it. I can adjust it later. I have my mask selected. And now I want to go ahead and paint, and I recommend flipping it so I can actually do the opposite. I'm going to invert. So now nothing is happening. This is affecting none of my bear. Have my mask selected. I come into my brush, and I'm going to go ahead and paint white to kind of highlight where I know there's light. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see it nice and clear. Probably should have done that to begin with, but I didn't. And start to paint a little bit of highlights on the side of the bear. Now my brush opacity is not high enough right now, so I'm turning it up a bit. Oh, I'm doing the opposite way. Since I have a black layer, I'm going to go ahead and paint black to darken my layer. Oh, since I have a black layer, nothing, so I'm going to paint white just to kind of help darken the edges of the bear. The key here is not to do the entire bear. I'm just going to highlight the darker portion. I'm going to click and I'm dragging. Every time I click, I'm going to add right now 59% of my opacity. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to click and drag here instead of continually, obsessively clicking. For one, it's annoying if other people in the room, they might not like that. For two, it actually creates a very blotchy feel on your layer. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little closer here, about like that. Go ahead and take it and paint away part of it on the front of the bear. Something like that. And when it's fairly opaque, doesn't always look great, but it's what it is. Yeah, that's better. I'm also going to try to fix his feet. So I go to our layer of the bear, go to my mask. I'm going to go ahead and paint black to try to fix his feet. I'm not a paw doctor, but I'm going to try. Come in here. I'm going to use a nice hard brush. Something like that. And I'm going to start to click and drag out, fix where his feet have grass, trying to show a little more of a intense layout. Now, considering his feet are there, I'm not going to totally recreate his feet. I could look up another bear picture, I suppose, and try to paint feet back in. But I'm not going to do that at this point. That looks pretty good. So between adding that mask in there, that's probably a little bit too bright. This mask here is a little bit too dark on the bear. I'm going to go ahead and click this layer to the adjustment layer. And now I can brighten it back up. I did that darker intentionally so I could see where I was actually painting. Maybe something like here. And that's just adding a little more darkness to it, which is good. Not an entire bear, but just portions of the bear are different layers of color. I think are really helping. You have a different feel, maybe a little bit more blue. I kind of like that blue layer. Not that much, that's a little bit much. And that's really making a difference on the bear. So let's look at before and after. Here's before, bear in the middle of New York, stopping traffic. And here's bear changed up and modified a little bit. Significant difference. Took some time to work up to make that bear match a little bit. I think maybe it's a little bit still too intense on the darkness. I'm going to go ahead and make it not quite as intense in the darkness, somewhere in between a little bit. Because I do want to still have some imagination that the bear is still bright. Bear is standing out. Obviously, if it's the polar bear in the middle of New York, it's going to stand out. So I guess I can have some artistic license there. But I think that really makes a big difference in terms of what we had to improving our polar bear. So I hope you enjoyed this video, barely stopping traffic, and I hope to see you next time on Better Picks in just a few clicks.